We covered X a couple weeks ago during our summer ween thing. And do you remember what I said was the real shock for me watching that movie?
Old people.
Yes. Old people are my kryptonite in horror.
And we didn't know they were in that movie.
Yes. And so I was not warned at all.
No.
And I made it through, but Pearl really freaked me out. And I was
Yeah.
glad she was young in the prequel.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's not just women, it's all old people, freaky old people I can't handle.
You heard it here first. Cam doesn't like old people.
And they're, yeah. Well, I mean, I could probably name 2 or 3.
Old people?
Yeah. Who are like worth it, you know?
I thought you just meant you could name them.
But honestly, I could name 1 or 2 young people I like.
Yeah, I was going to say.
it's not an ageism thing.
Right, okay.
I'm a selective boy.
Right.
So the thing that gets me is old people. And everyone sort of has their thing in horror. I've yet to meet someone who's impervious to anything. Even if it doesn't stop you from seeing the thing. Something that just hits you a little extra hard. And one of the classic things that freaks people out in horror is clowns.
Yeah.
And we've been watching some great fucked up clown movies lately. Art the Clown is the character. He's in Terrifier 2, which just came out this weekend. And we've been going back and seeing the earlier movies that this character was in, created by Damien Leone, who writes and directs all of these movies with this character and does the special effects and makeup. So it's really his brainchild. And in the vein of Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, the creature design is that good.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't use this word because I think it's oversaturated in the culture. It's an iconic look.
Yeah.
Art the Clown.
Yeah.
And they're really freaky movies. They're spare and simple and genuinely terrifying.
Yeah, they're really freaky. The other movies we watched are All Hallows Eve and Terrifier.
Right.
So Terrifier 2 just came out.
Yeah, yeah. So we've been loving those, but they're pretty heavy. I mean, they're genuinely screwed up gore, blood.
Yeah, they are gnarly.
They're
it's
dismal.
It's not like fun like the Saw movies.
Right.
Like it's gross.
Like the outlook on the world is dismal.
Yeah.
They're incredibly well crafted.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah. But it's rough going.
So just to as like a palate cleanser, as a sorbet before we go to bed or whatever, we've been pairing these extreme horror clown movies with the lightest and most entertaining movies imaginable, which of course are the later sequels in the 50 Shades trilogy. So you pair All Hallows Eve with 50 Shades Darker, and then you pair Terrifier 1, which has a scene of a woman being cut in half by a clown. You pair that with 50 Shades Freed, which in some ways is more painful to watch.
In every way, it's more painful to
like,
watch.
They're genuinely entertaining and fun movies.
Yeah.
Because they have genuinely talented actors. We love Dakota Johnson. I like Jamie Dornan. I think they're great directors involved. And they are fighting for their lives against the worst script ever created.
They're doing their very best.
And it's like the moments when you feel them pull back, mostly Jamie Dornan, like when he's confronted with a line that is just soul-shakingly uncomfortable.
He's got a lot more of those, so
yeah. He short end of the stick in the script department.
Poor guy.
When he's faced with some of those like extra heavy, embarrassing lines, he almost transcends into like Adam West Batman territory, where the movies become like farcical. Like he's playing it straight, but you're not supposed to take it seriously.
Right.
And watching those dreadful later sequels after like really being tense for an hour and a half at a really screwed up clown, I slept like a baby afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
It neutralized it perfectly.
Well, exactly. There's nothing that'll remind you that movies are not real quite like the 50 Shades trilogy, because not a single second of that movie, of any of those movies, is believable.
No.
It is all so fictional.
It's so funny, like the kind of bipartisan puritanism of American culture. Like these movies were viewed as the most subversive and sexual and shockingly inappropriate things to ever hit the mainstream. We were watching the third movie, which the first time I saw it, I was just blinded by the weirdness of the convenient plot devices and just the way the script just kept punching forward into the next like theatrical event that would happen.
Can't even get into it. Yeah.
There's no sense of logic or narrative to it. But watching it this time and seeing more the machinations of it, the point of the movie is to buy a gun, shoot people, and defend yourself, get married, and have babies.
That's literally the message.
But we see a nipple 3 times, so it's shockingly subversive.
I just love that the arc of this story is a man becomes normal and has a baby. Like, what?
I know. Yeah, he gets domesticated.
By a woman. She fixes him and makes him normal and forces him to have a child.
Versus, again, Art the Clown sawing a woman in half.
Yeah.
No moral panic about that one.
Nope.
Because, well, I guess there's a nipple in that one too, but...
Just the one.
Sure.
Okay.
Different context.
Little bit.
Yeah, we're here today,
anyway,
of course.
That's not why we're here at all. That's just a tangent. But if you're like, I want to watch this really freaky movie, but I'm a little nervous about how I feel after, just watch 50 Shades.
Oh, by the way,
what?
If you want to, those are 2 date nights for you right there, those double features.
Right.
And if you want a loved one, a special friend, if you want to watch these movies for free, we found them on Tubi. TUBI, which is
ads.
like a free streaming service with ads. It has
but
all 4 of the movies we just named on
and
there.
the ads aren't that they don't happen very often.
No.
And honestly, it's kind of nice when you're watching something like Terrifier because you need a break, and it's nice when you're watching something like 50 Shades because you need a break.
Yes, because you can breathe during the horror, and then you can shit talk.
I like that you said special friend. My grandma, until actually I think even after we've been married, she's always called you my friend. How's your friend? Oh, my husband, Nani? He's great. I love my grandma.
6.5 minutes. We are here today. We're doing a little discussion episode where we're going every other week with The Witcher for a little while, just because they've become more of an entree. When the chapters are like 4 or 5 times longer than they used to be, it takes more time to get through them and do a good job. So on alternate Fridays, we're going to do these little discussion episodes where we waste your time with horror recommendations.
Yeah, but that's not what we're doing. But no, next Friday we'll be back with Baptism of Fire. But so what are we doing today?
Yeah, I mean, we have these ideas that sort of collect in the notes app of my phone because every, twice a week we're talking about a different work of art. And that means that our discussion is limited to that world of whatever artwork we're talking about. But larger trends and concepts emerge, but you don't want to shoehorn that into a conversation about a clown movie.
Yeah, you don't want to go off for 20 minutes talking about something that's only vaguely tangentially connected to what you're talking about.
So we're sort of extrapolating, and we're having one of those larger chats, which is fun. Today we're talking about canon, and the basic 2 questions: what is it, and does it matter? And
now, are you referring to the song by the White Stripes?
There you go. Perfect.
Your favorite song.
It is. It's the greatest White Stripes song. It's called Canon. It's 2.5 minutes. It will rock your socks off.
It's a good one. That's not what
we also saw him play it live, and I got all sorts of excited.
That was such a good show. Okay, but canon, you mean like book canon, like story canon?
Yes, canon. Like the Western canon of, Moby Dick and Hemingway.
Well, no,
and
the
all that.
Western canon would be like, that would be like all the... There's lots of different kinds of canons. How about you? Sorry, you go ahead.
The Western literary canon
would
include Herman Melville and Ernest Hemingway.
No, I know, but I'm saying like the canon of Moby Dick is not the same thing as the Western canon.
Have you read Moby Dick?
Of course not.
I rest my case.
Have you read Moby Dick?
The germ of this conversation
was
not. Me noticing sort of the pattern in some of our discussions between talking about House of the Dragon, talking about The Witcher show, talking about the Peter Jackson movies. We talk about adaptation all the time. We talk about adaptation. We talk about reimaginings, retcons, the idea that retroactively connecting things.
Is that a term that people use?
For about 10 years
never
in popular
heard that.
culture.
In my entire life, I've never heard that.
Maggie's allergic to idioms if you're following along at home.
Cam was raised on idioms that only people born in 1935 use.
Yes, I didn't eat for 10 years. It was just idioms.
Okay.
There's also the thing that has bothered us to no end of when you feel like a new entry in a franchise is trying to fix the older work of art.
Yes.
That just bugs the shit out of us.
That makes me feel icky.
And the commonality in all of these concepts and patterns is canon. It's the question of what counts, what's official, what matters. And I think a lot of this conversation is going to be about franchises because that's an easy way to discuss kind of individual canons. But of course it can extend beyond that.
Yeah.
But I've tried to organize this discussion into, I'm going to present 3 possible definitions that I've tried to come up with for what is canon, what could canon be, and then we've got a bunch of examples we're going to go through and try to figure out how those definitions apply. So, not a homework episode. You'll recognize some of the examples and probably not the others, but we're not going to spoil things.
Well, I'm relieved because I didn't do any homework for this episode.
That's great.
Great.
So 3 definitions, and I tried to keep them really simple, give them a little tagline so it's easy to follow along.
Great.
I don't want to make this a video essay. So the first one is...
there's no video part, so I don't know how you would...
We have a thriving YouTube channel at Second Breakfast Pod. thriving.
No, we actually do. Please go look at it. We're really revamping it, so take a look.
I just got a weird smiley emoji from Google the other day because we passed 1,000 views on our channel.
Is Google hitting on you?
I guess.
Why don't you ease up there?
How's your friend Google? So the first possible definition is to say that canon is creators. To say that the only things that are canon in any franchise or world or creative property you're talking about, it's only the original inventors and stuff they touched. It's only what existed at the ground floor. And everything else, everything that comes after, is more or less fan fiction. And as someone at home, as an audience member, it is fully optional.
I feel like that's a pretty commonly accepted definition of canon.
Yeah, and there are problems for all of these definitions, but I totally see the appeal of this one because it suggests that artists have, it gives them absolute control over their creations and insulates them from later meddling.
Sure. Yeah.
But the second definition is the one that exists more in the world in 2022.
Okay.
And that is canon as copyright. So whatever franchise you love becomes an undying, faceless, perpetually for sale, existing under a corporate caretaker. All the creative decisions and desires take a back seat, and it becomes this for-profit, loping, zombified machine.
Sure. But so by that, you mean like it's not considered part of the canon unless it's officially licensed by the whatever corporation's in charge.
Unless you pay the licensing fee.
So right, so it's not actual like fan fiction on Wattpad, but it's like if it's a spin-off written by somebody post
who paid
Tolkien,
for the rights,
but they paid for it. It's fine.
If you pay the licensing fee, then it's just as canonized and legitimate as whatever the original creator made.
Got it.
That's the argument. You can imagine my feelings about that one, but I think there's a way.
But in a way, it's more democratic.
No, it's not. It's just capitalism.
But it's not dictatorial.
No, it's whoever has enough money, then you can bastardize and ruin whatever you want to.
I just mean compared to it being the creator only, because then only one person.
Creators should be dictators.
But no one man should have all that power.
They should, though. If that one man spends 20 years coming up with Middle Earth, then yes, he is the dictator of Middle Earth.
Sorry, I only abide by the words of Kanye West. Go ahead.
That's a rough thing to say this week, Maggie. Maybe you didn't catch his cool T-shirt.
No, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Do you think I care what Kanye West is doing?
He wore a White Lives Matter T-shirt during a fashion show.
Oh my God!
Anyway,
I'm so sorry. Never mind.
Canon is copyright.
Why would you let me say that?
I didn't. I tried to save you.
I was trying to go to stop.
You tried to be ironic, but the man has changed in the last couple of years.
Okay, sorry about that.
Anyway,
God,
I think there's a way to view this in a less grumpy way, the canon as copyright, and to try to play devil's advocate to myself here, laying out this definition. You could say, ideally, if I'm a creator in my 70s and I have a thing that I love, that I poured, it's my life's work, I really put my time into, maybe if I have good meetings with someone I trust, then I'm selling the rights to the thing I made, my baby, to a like-minded organization that I can trust their stewardship of the property in the future.
Yeah.
So it could be a good thing. Maybe.
Sure.
I think it never ends up being that.
No, never.
Because alternatively, we've seen it, all the time. The idea of the franchise is bled dry, exploited, overexposed, and ends up contradicting everything it used to be.
Yep. What's the third one?
So the third one, and it's a great transition from the second one, the third one is nihilism. The third one is canon is irrelevant. It is, you're leaning on that older idea. And that is still a definition. You're saying that canon is whatever you want it to be. Art is totally subjective to each audience member, to each person of the 8 billion on the planet. So canon is impossibly subjective too. And if you look at a franchise that has 9 movies in it and you like 2 of them, then only like the 2 of them and completely throw out the rest of them. That canon can be fully individual and absolutely a la carte. Take what you want and forget the rest. They don't mean anything.
Yeah, but then you can't have Yeah, it becomes relevant because you can't have canon because everybody's is going to be different, so there is no canon.
Right.
Okay.
So do you have an immediate... Do you lean towards any of those three definitions?
I mean, neither of them is bulletproof, but the first one feels the easiest and the most true to how I feel about it.
Canon is creators, canon is copyright, canon is irrelevant.
Creators.
Okay. So we've got some examples to play with, and we're going to try to apply these definitions and see how people feel about it, how we feel about it, and how it sort of challenges these definitions to hopefully push us towards one of them.
And by the end, we're going to have an exact answer, right? With no possibility for discussion.
We're going to solve canon.
We're going to solve it right now.
Ideally in the next 10 to 12 minutes. Yeah. So
you think we're going to do this in 12 minutes? You better start talking.
It's a lightning round. So example 1 is, and this one's a fun little curveball, Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. So when I say Game of Thrones, I mean the show, because the books are called something else. The book's called Song of Ice and Fire. Mm-hmm. So the Game of Thrones show, they paid for the copyright. Mm-hmm. George got money. The book publisher was paid their whatever to license it appropriately.
And he was involved. He's not even dead.
He was involved initially. He wrote a couple episodes, but he didn't have veto power to control editorial decisions and changes from the book. And as the show went on, he gets less and less involved. And by the end of the show, they've gone beyond his books, and he's not writing for the show anymore.
Yeah.
So those things, if you say canon is creators, then they've left the creator behind. But they still have the copyright.
Well, here's the thing.
I'm saying, is the...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, just to frame it correctly, the question I was getting to is the end of Game of Thrones canon?
Oh, well, I think the problem with this definition is that it says creators plural, because you could argue that the creators of the show are not George R.R. Martin. So yeah, it is canon because it's the creators of the show. But if you want to go back to the beginning, then no, it's not, because that means George is the creator and George only. And so, but that would mean that any deviation from the books wouldn't be canon, right?
Unless he somehow endorsed them, and then you could sort of have two canons.
Oh, see, I don't like when there's two canons. This is why I have a hard time with comics, or with superhero comics, I should say. I like lots of comics, but when it's one story, yeah. There's
I think it is sort of an interesting case because the adaptation is surpassing the source material.
Yes, I mean, and I think see, my inclination is to say yes, those later seasons are more like fan fiction, and that's because they deviate. But also because, or not even deviate, they fully go past with the loosest structure that he gave them imaginable. But also because they're not good. And so I'm more inclined to call them, to demote them to fan fiction status. But I feel like if they had been good, then I would have a different, or if I had thought they were good, I would have a different opinion about how canonical they are,
right?
So maybe that's not very fair.
And the problem only gets more complicated because watching House of the Dragon, like we are, check out those episodes on Tuesdays. Hi, Tristan. George R.R. Martin is listed as a creator in the credits for House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
Now he's not actively a writer listed on the episodes, but it's from a completed book. It's being adapted from a completed work.
Yeah, so there's no option to go past the book.
And he's much, much more involved with every Game of Thrones project at HBO now with that creative veto power and oversight.
Do you think that's because, I mean, I have no idea, but is it because they learned from the later seasons?
Yes, we talked about this in our first House of the Dragon episode. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
I ran through a bunch of interviews and they talked about how their relationship with him changed after what happened in the later seasons.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I totally
And they had the bright idea of, let's trust the creator.
What if we, right. Doing. Okay, great. Okay.
So that's an example. I think that pushes me away from copyright. There's a connected example here which might help flesh this out a little more.
Okay.
West Wing.
Yeah.
Similar problem. So the creator, Aaron Sorkin. Who is, there are other writers listed, but he's rewriting everything and making all those decisions.
And it was his idea for the show.
Right.
It's his show. But again, I mean, that's complicated because a TV show, a movie, that's a collaborative effort. So
but it starts as a script.
Yeah.
So he's the architect.
The germ comes from one person, and that's who gets to decide what things are canon. Sure.
Yeah. So I think these problems of canon almost always go back to the writer. Mm-hmm. So he leaves the show after 4 seasons, but the show goes 7. Mm-hmm. And the show continues on the same network in the same time slot with the same cast and the same crew.
Yeah. But it is completely different.
So like if you're arguing that the creator of a show isn't just one person, because it is the cast and the crew and everyone else that goes into it. Mm-hmm. If you just take that one little puzzle piece out, but it's the one puzzle piece that started the puzzle.
Yes. And I mean, you've told me like, so you watched The West Wing 100 times.
Yeah.
I've only watched it all the way through once. Mm-hmm. And when you were watching with me, you told me like, now listen, we're going to watch the whole thing, but you have to understand, we don't count the last 3 seasons.
Right.
And again, because they were not good, I was willing to accept that definition of canon. I'd be like, yeah, Sorkin wasn't involved in these suck, these are not canon, I don't count these in my head. This is bad fan fiction.
Right.
Which is so, but again, what if they had been really great? Like after Sorkin left, like, can you think of an example where an original creator becomes less or not involved at all, and
the thing improves,
or the thing stays good? I don't know.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Not off the top of my head. No, because I think every ship has a captain.
Yeah. Okay.
There is one guy there's one person at the root of all these.
Honestly, is there any franchise that gets better the longer it goes? No. No, never.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
also,
great.
There is a trend of creators leaving when things go too long.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Yeah, I think that sort of illustrates the Game of Thrones problem there.
Yeah.
And because with West Wing and Game of Thrones there, it satisfies the copyright requirement. Mm-hmm. And it does become optional. You can say canon's irrelevant, but when you watch it and characters start acting like wildly out of character, you still have a visceral response.
Yeah, you're like, that's not right. And like, you know intuitively, like instinctually that's not right.
And there's nothing you can do about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that impotence is central to this conversation, because as a fan, when all of these things are being decided by multinational conglomerates, you have no power over any of it. Mm-hmm. You can spend all day saying, well, I only consider the original published Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I don't think, I mean, this is my opinion. Yeah. I don't think the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, I don't think any of that is canon to me.
Oh, because they were not finished and endorsed by Tolkien.
Because Tolkien spent 20 years constructing intricately that story. And then his son publishes every napkin he ever wrote.
Yeah, and like goes in and fills in the blanks, and it's like it's not exactly what that creator originally intended.
Like if you had 4 books on a shelf that you thought were bulletproof, and you edited and sculpted and nailed them down, and that was your life's work, and then every draft that you stuck in a drawer, someone published and put next to those 4, the effect would be to dilute your overall output. I mean, it would be like if after a musician died, every single demo and rejected song and B-side they just had in their closet on their hard drive, if you released all of those things and said, this, we file that right next to Seven Nation Army.
Yeah, weird. So in this instance, you're now kind of going beyond, like, you're not just talking about the canon of Lord of the Rings, you're talking about the canon of Tolkien.
Right.
And that's a little bit different.
Well, okay,
like that's what I was kind of saying earlier about like the Western canon versus, there are different levels of canon.
Well, I'm talking about the respective canon of each individual artist.
Yeah, but by canon we mean something that we accept to be true in whatever universe we're working in. Like whatever parallel universe where the Lord of the Rings story is happening, that's a canon, right? That's how I look at it. Are you looking at it in a broader way?
No, I'm just talking about the idea of sort of consent to release things.
Yeah, but I'm saying
instead of just you having created it.
No, I understand, but I'm saying it seems like you're going beyond the conversation of canon now. So I'm just trying to meet you where you are.
Oh, no, I thought I was on topic.
No, so how are you defining, like, what is canon to you then?
Well, I was trying to test that against the definitions, because I think it's not enough to just say the creator made it. I think you almost have to go another step and say the creator wanted it out there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. A draft of Lord of the Rings is not going to be canon because it wasn't his final decision.
And there's something, I mean, even we talked about this when it was released, the newly illustrated Lord of the Rings version, which has all of Tolkien's little sketches thrown in there. Mm-hmm. That wasn't something he decided to publish.
Yeah.
Alongside the words he spent 20 years crafting.
Yeah, there were certain illustrations that he did choose to publish, which he already did.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't like the idea of just tossing that in there so it's a deluxe edition. I mean, literally, they're charging $200. $250, I think, for a leather-bound Lord of the Rings right now with all the illustrations in there.
Yeah.
It's big and red and gaudy and miserable. But
fun.
I that bugs me. And I don't know how to frame that into this conversation because, again, I'm going beyond the canon is creator's definition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like there is this emotional reaction, whether it's in The West Wing when Josh and Toby start fist fighting and you know that's out of character.
Yeah.
Or if something happens in Tolkien that bugs you and like, why is this draft, why is this brain fart being published next to the thing he spent decades on?
Yeah.
I don't know how to satisfy that, but it is an emotional thing that this conversation gets into. And I feel like a lot of that is glanced over in the larger cultural conversation here.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's why we're so willing to, I think culturally we do really accept that first definition of it being up to the creator. Because you look at things like J.K. Rowling, who after the last Harry Potter book was published, she was like with the creation of Pottermore and just her constantly answering questions on Twitter about, well, what happened to these characters after they died, or her telling us online, but not in the books, that Dumbledore was gay, and everybody accepting that as canon. Like, that tells us how tied we are and married we are to that definition, understanding of canon. Even though not a single word on any Harry Potter book page indicates Dumbledore's sexuality. You could maybe glean it from the Deathly Hallows stuff, but it is so vague and it's not.
Right.
It's not in the text. You can maybe interpret it if you try, but it is not in the text. But because she tweeted it or said it in an interview or whatever it was, everybody accepted it like full stop. I mean, some people were unhappy about it, but they like accepted that as being in the canon. And then when they made the Fantastic Beasts movies, everybody fully expected them to address that part of young Dumbledore.
Right.
Like, that's how accepted it was.
So, it suggests that people do buy into that first definition pretty easily, but it almost, like, imagine that in a different medium, if you're not talking about a book.
Yeah.
Because her being able to change the story years later.
Yeah.
Imagine if a painter could go into the museum and just add a couple brushstrokes.
Everyone would go insane.
Like, the suggestion is that the art can evolve and shift over time because it's always tethered to that creator. And as long as they're alive, they can shift it a bit.
Well, and when you, like, and I know that our cultural understanding of J.K. Rowling has shifted a lot in the past few years, but pre that, like, there was almost this this idolization of her as this great auteur because she thought everything ahead in advance. Like, she planned it all out. So when she said, oh yeah, Dumbledore's been gay all along, we didn't read that as, oh, she's adding that. It was, oh, that was always there. And so we accepted it as true because of course it was, because she's made this world so real to us. It's felt so like it really could exist. And so she has said, oh, it's always been like that. So we automatically were on board. You know?
And your opinion of J.K. Rowling does not have any bearing on the fact that those books are unbelievably well structured.
Well, yeah,
the plotting is intricate and incredible and 10 years ahead, where you can find little things that tie so perfectly to these butterfly effect explosions a decade later that they have to be intentional.
I really recommend reading Chamber of Secrets and Half-Blood Prince back to back because there's so much and
she was doing those, like, it was almost before Reddit AMAs. She would do these long Q&As where she would type out these little responses.
Like, well, what happened to Teddy Tonks? What happened to
happened to Neville? Oh, he ended up teaching it. And I remember I would print out all of those. It was like a 10 or 20 page MuggleNet article.
I think I did that too.
But what an interesting impulse. When I have her books on the shelf, and I want a hard copy of the thing she's adding to the canon.
Yes, right. Because immediately accept it because the author said it.
Yeah,
and
Scholastic and Bloomsbury weren't saying it. It was her.
It doesn't have to be printed in a book for you. I mean, the same reason that all the backstory on like the history of magic and Hogwarts and Ilvermorny and all that's on Pottermore, you also accept all that because it's endorsed by the author.
Yeah. And like, I mean, we talked about this. We did 3 episodes going through the Fantastic Beasts movies. Mm-hmm. And if those were written by anyone else, I wouldn't be a tenth as interested in them.
I know. Even though, but yeah, and so that's what's funny because I said earlier, well, we were really like willing to not accept the last few seasons of Game of Thrones because they're not endorsed by the creator and because they're bad. The Fantastic Beasts movies are not great, but they're written by the author, so you're like, well, you know.
I think they get... I have a very unpopular opinion that I think each one is kind of better than the last on a rewatch.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's kind of what we concluded when we watched all of them.
But you watch it differently knowing that the creator did it.
Yeah,
it just means more.
Because you look at this and you're thinking, okay, I recognize that objectively this is not a great movie, but I am still intrigued by this plot and I accept it as true and I think about it in the context of the events that happen in the Harry Potter story. And so, you know, you're still accepting it as canon, even if you can look at it from a distance and go, this is not a good movie.
And again, there's a contrast in this franchise. I think franchises are really cogent to this discussion.
Yeah.
Fantastic Beasts being not anywhere near Harry Potter.
No.
Quality-wise, cultural weight,
character
quality.
Story. Like it's
as much as I enjoy them. And I quite enjoy them.
Yeah, they're fun.
They're not Harry Potter.
No.
And they won't. They kind of can't be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But they're infinitely more valuable to me than Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Yes.
Because she wrote them.
Yes, she did not write Cursed
Child. And I know
Child.
she kind of had some
she
input
was involved, but again...
But she didn't write it.
In the same way that George R. R. Martin was vaguely involved in the last seasons of Game of Thrones. Like, he gets some credits somewhere because, you know, and he consulted a bit, but...
She wouldn't have written
Voldemort Day. Oh, my God.
She wouldn't have done that.
She wouldn't have given him a child. I can't. Listen.
But, like, it's a similar conversation. Almost, I mean... It's almost the exact same conversation in Star Wars. So you have the original 3, which you take as the Harry Potter movies. Everyone loves classic, the dictatorial role of the creator.
George Lucas made those movies. He's the creator, like endorsed by, created by him.
And then you've got the prequel trilogy later, which no one loved. But they were still made by George Lucas.
And he put his soul into those.
And I adored them because I was young.
Yeah.
And the third one is I like the third one.
Yeah, I know a lot of people our age like them because they saw them when they were young. Yeah.
But even the third one's just a fun, colorful movie, and there's a lava fight and a guy with too many lights. It's a fun
good
thing.
Backstory.
And Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
But those were still accepted as canon. Even if they weren't enjoyed, they were accepted.
Yes.
Because they had the original creators, not just blessing, but curation.
Yeah.
And then... And this is where we get into the second definition of canon as copyright. The creator gets out of the game and sells the whole thing to Disney. So they have the copyright now. They've got the logo. They've got the score. They even bring back most of the actors from the original trilogy that people loved the most.
They even bring back the actors who aren't alive anymore.
And I think, I mean, this is sort of showing my hand here. I consider all of these things where the creator's not involved totally optional.
Yeah.
And I think you can like them, you don't, whatever.
Optional is an optional to accept them as canon or not.
For the audience member.
Yeah.
They are utterly optional. Yes. I do not recognize the legitimacy of the copyright.
So you're not saying like, no, this is not canon at all, full stop. But you're like, yes, either way.
Look at it this way. Force Awakens, I saw it day it came out. I saw it with Tristan, actually, which was really good. That part's canon. But the movie isn't. The movie is fine. I love Adam Driver more than anything. Movie's fine.
It's fine.
Solo. I liked Solo a lot.
Solo's fun.
Last Jedi, I enjoyed at the time. I think going into it, I was in a space and I was at an age where I wanted just a wild left turn from something that I was used to.
Sure.
And that movie is that. Then Rogue One, I adored.
Rogue One's fun. Yeah.
I adored Rogue One. And so that one, I canonize in my head.
Yeah.
And then Mando's good. Boba Fett, didn't like that one. So that one I just toss out.
Yeah, it's not there.
It's all a la carte.
Yeah.
And I think that if we're talking about sort of the uneasy position of the audience member, a la carte, canon is irrelevant will give you a much longer and happier life.
Sure, yeah. But then that means that everybody's going to disagree and no one can agree on what the canon is.
But if you start with that ground rule of we don't respect the corporation and the copyright, it's up to me now because I grew up with it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter anyway because it's a product being sold by Disney. It's not an impassioned creative effort in the same way it was when George Lucas was in the 70s.
Exactly.
With
trying to make a movie without big studio interference.
With scotch tape and gum in the desert. It's just not the same thing anymore.
If y'all want to, and this is endorsing a Disney product now, but there's a great documentary that was made in the early 2000s called Empire of Dreams about George Lucas making the original trilogy. It's fantastic because that man was going for it. And it's pretty inspiring and really cool.
It's incredibly inspiring. It's on Disney Plus.
Yeah, watch it.
But I think if you start with those ground rules of like what you like, don't like what you don't like, like the reason the discourse, I mean, all of these topics we've talked about, the reason the discourse is so poisoned online is that the presumption is this like moral judgment based on your preference for something.
Yeah, like, well, if you accept that as canon, that means you're okay with this like terrible thing that happened to this person. And you're like, what?
Or if you don't like it, then you're a racist.
Right.
Or any of those pejoratives that come out in the woodwork for your like, subjective opinion of a work of art as like, one of 8 billion human beings.
Yeah, as if your opinion about a creator's intent and like has anything to do with your opinion about social and human rights issues. Like, what are you talking about?
It doesn't have to be a la carte.
Yeah.
Say you're a diehard canon is creators and you say it's not George Lucas, so fuck off.
Yeah.
Or J.K. Rowling or whatever else that we've talked about. Say you that's how you feel. There's nothing else going on into your decision to disregard any new entry in that canon.
Like and we haven't watched The Rings of Power yet, and we will. I'm waiting till the season's done and stuff, but we're gonna watch them and we'll share on our Substack. But the reason we talked about this, we're hesitant to accept that version of the story as canon is because there's no direct creator involvement and they're heavily deviating from the original story. It has nothing to do with the race of the cast members.
Of course not.
Like, obviously not.
Of course not.
That's obviously not my problem with it. Like, you're stupid for even thinking that. It's because we're not going with what the creator created.
The problems are multifaceted.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, I feel like this was the baby steps of us getting into this conversation.
Yeah, when we first started talking about
Power. I mean, the beginning of this show is us backdooring into Lord of the Rings, coming from the Peter Jackson movies, understanding references and choices made in adaptation backwards. And by the end of that journey, we have a different view on the Peter Jackson movies than we did when we started.
Yeah.
And then I can say, Tolkien, some writers, books just fall out. They do 8 a year, and they're just good, and they can just bang it out in a month, and it's gone.
Yeah.
If you spend 20 years intricately making all the backstory and details and cultures of these people and interactions and histories and languages...
Yep.
I just think it's a different thing.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't think endless slavish reverence to the original creator is always necessary in adaptation.
No, right.
None of these things are always. They're not absolutes.
Exactly.
But I think it matters more in a property like Game of Thrones. So the more I read, going through doing a close reading week by week of Lord of the Rings chapters, the more uneasy I was about any adaptation because it is such a complex and singular world that has been crafted. And I became less and less comfortable with my earlier idolatry of the Peter Jackson movies.
Yes, even though those are wonderful adaptations, and in my head, like, it is still hard for me to remove certain things of like what I believe to be true about the canon of Lord of the Rings. Like, now, is that from the books or is that in the movies? Like, it's hard for me to adjust because that was my first experience with the story. But yeah, it really made me rethink just how I think about that story.
We lived and breathed that world for a year and a half. We took in, we talked about every detail in that series. And there is so much passion and empathy in that world that when I saw the news initially that the rights were being sold for like $250,000 to Amazon. Like you ordered something from Amazon the other day, and the package came and you weren't here, so I went and got it.
Yeah.
And the packaging has the Rings of Power advertising on it.
It does, yeah.
And I picked up the package to bring it inside, and I flashed back to this news story from a couple months ago about Amazon workers being so mistreated and on such rigorous, brutal schedules where if they're a little bit late, they're going to be fired by an app.
Yeah.
That they're shitting in bags and pissing in water bottles in the delivery truck. Going from that to thinking back to how Tolkien felt about the world and industrialization.
Yeah.
And the message he was sending with hobbits and the importance of community and trying to find shared values and compromise and learn about each other. That heartbreaking compassion.
Yeah.
And utter sincerity. To totally trust in the creative liberty and honesty of that company.
Right.
With this property.
Yeah. Feels so wrong.
As an audience member, as a human being, as a writer, as anything that I am under no obligation to extend a morsel, a crumb of trust to that company.
I know.
Never mind any other adaptation.
That's
you. Just how I felt about that one.
Yeah.
And that is my right. And I just love that the discourse has become, so you don't like black dwarves.
Yeah, like, no. God. Also,
so
thanks
insane.
for making me feel bad for ordering from Amazon. I tried to find something and I couldn't find it at any other store, so I got it on Amazon. I'm sorry. But
so, yeah, that's what I've been not saying on the podcast for 3 months.
Yeah, because I haven't known how to, like, it's hard to... Because I don't want people to think that
Because I didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then I picked up that package the other day, and that's what I thought about.
Totally. Yeah.
So
no, that's a great point.
If you have feelings about Lord of the Rings, let's go into this a little deeper, because that's our next example. Earlier this year, regardless of what you think about the artistic integrity of Amazon, the rights to Lord of the Rings were sold to the Swedish conglomerate Embracer Group. The rights including movies, books, stage productions, games, theme parks, and merch for Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, and The Unfinished Tales. The sale price was just north of $2 billion.
Wow.
And they're going to franchise and commodify and expand in movies and everything to the... They have the rights to all that, and you don't pay $2 billion to not capitalize on those rights. When you ask the question after introducing those details of... So is everything that Embracer Group, is everything that the Swedish conglomerate ever decides to do with this property, is that all canon in the same way that Tolkien's was?
No, of course it isn't.
Is the 20 years of his life, is that the same as what the international conglomerate decides to put on a fucking lunchbox? Is that just equally valid in an artistic sense? Because you could apply all of this. You could apply this to the animated movies, which are gloriously weird. They're wild adaptations.
Oh.
The costuming is...
delightful.
I mean, it's surreal.
Aragorn's mini skirt and thigh highs. I can't get over it.
You could apply those arguments to some people like the animated movies, some people don't. They're kind of weird. They're too weird for some people. They're kind of too weird for us.
They're too weird for me, for sure.
You could apply that argument to Rings of Power. You could apply that argument to the Peter Jackson movies.
Yeah, some people really don't like the Peter Jackson movies. I mean, it's rare, but some people don't.
If you ever go up, try this at home. If you go up to a friend. And you say, friend. Hey, what's the last movie you saw in theaters? And they'll tell you. And then you ask, what'd you think of the movie?
Yeah.
They're not going to punch you in the head and call you a bigot. Like it's this.
What do you mean? What I think of it
on an interpersonal, non-internet level, people understand these ideas.
Yeah,
it's okay to like things and not like things.
Right. Yeah.
So this like a la carte canon is irrelevant position. I think you can find that in everyday interactions in history as much as you can find the canon as creator's opinion.
Sure, yeah.
Because this really isn't the end of the world. People are worried about food and shelter and going to work.
Yeah,
you know?
That.
The sanctity of whatever the fuck they read in middle school maybe isn't the leading concern on their mind when, gas in California is $8 a gallon. Maybe they're not too concerned about how the character of Galadriel is being represented.
Right, maybe not so much, yeah.
So let's move on to another example.
Okay, great. I've got one too, but it's small. But you can go.
No, you jump in.
Well, one I keep thinking about is The Shining. Because I was trying to think of, okay, what's an example that's not a franchise? Because I think it's important to think about those two. So The Shining, the book by Stephen King, great book, obviously. But does not, and a lot of people think this, it does not compare to the Kubrick movie. Like,
sure.
I've read and watched them both, and I know which one is better. And I don't think it's just because I have a bias because I saw the movie first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that the way the movie handles it's an execution of that concept in a much better way. What they do with Jack is more interesting. Mm-hmm. The ending is better. Almost everything about the movie is better than the book. And Stephen King was really frustrated with that adaptation because it was so different. And I'm sure because so many people prefer it over his book. I mean, I'd be mad too if the movie that was made from my book was better than my book. Like, I would be pissed. But so when I think about the story of The Shining and what is in the canon of that story for me, it's the movie. And it has something to do with the creator. It's because I think it's the better version. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's, again, where you move away from the first definition and more into it being irrelevant because it's picking and choosing.
And we talked about earlier the sort of emotional component of this. Mm-hmm. It's interesting in that example because the emotional component isn't something the audience is feeling. Mm-hmm. It's something the creator's feeling.
Yeah. And I think it's also that I don't feel too bad about it because Stephen King has a million other books and he's incredibly successful and it's fine. Like, if it was like this one author who had written this one book and then died at 35 and that was it, then I would be like, no, of course the canon is the book, like, but I think that also changes your opinion of it as well.
Massively outlived Kubrick.
Yeah, there is that. That's true.
That's
yeah,
some sort of victory.
That's true. And like there are like It by Stephen King, that book is better than any adaptation is ever going to be. Like, that book is a masterpiece. I mean, it's too long. There are parts you could cut, but it's a beautiful book.
It has such intricacy that when I was reading that book, it kind of felt like the way Lord of the Rings did.
Yeah. Just this intergenerational, expansive, beautifully woven tapestry of a story.
Derry is probably his Middle Earth. It is so built out and full. And there's so much resonance between characters and
just
lines.
The way that the story, because it's told in a non-linear way, so the way that the story is woven, you cannot replicate in an adaptation. And that's a beautiful example of I will never consider an It adaptation as canon. I will enjoy it for what it is, and like I love the recent movies. I think they're great. Second one's a little rough, but I enjoy watching them and they make me nostalgic for the book, but the book is the canon for me in that instance. So,
So a different example, and I think you alluded to this earlier, is the world of comics. So we did a month of episodes on Batman covering different great stories.
We did Bat Month in March.
I really liked doing that.
We do, yeah.
It's really fun talking about comics because there's the story element and the art element. I think it makes for a pretty robust conversation. It also explodes that idea of creator because usually there are 2 or 3 or 4 people involved in the production of a comic.
There's a writer, there's an artist, there's a colorist, there's a
letterer.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
And that's like placement of the balloons as well as what the words look like. So there's a lot of work going on in all of those different areas. Mm-hmm. I tend to gravitate towards people who do it all themselves, but that's my problem.
Yeah.
The world of comics, let's zero in on Batman as an example of a long-running franchise managed by multiple companies over the years. Mm-hmm. Never mind just DC. In the past few years, DC has moved owners from being, it was the property of AT&T for a while, and now it is under the purview of Warner Brothers Discovery.
Yeah.
So that's decades of radical shifts and reboots. Yeah. Batman, when you think of that idea, you're picturing probably one of the movies or one of the comics if you really go deep.
Yeah.
And that is a tapestry of different visions and creative teams. But because it's just about who owns DC now, it means that every dumbbell character shift and revelation that is pops up about Batman now is official. And as someone who's loved Batman my entire life, the idea that it's up to the creative whim of the phone company, what counts in this franchise that I care about, it's the reason why I've been so hard on the second definition, canon is copyright.
Sure.
I think it just can't be that.
Yeah.
But as a guy who wasn't alive in the 1930s, I'm not saying that Batman was only canon during Bob Kane and Bill Finger's day, the guys who invented him.
Right.
Like,
Well, and a superhero canon is hard to define anyway.
Yeah.
Because you have 18,000 different runs about, and this is something that I had a really hard time wrapping my head around until we started getting into comics, and I'm still confused by it. But like, there's not one story of Batman. There's not one story about, I mean, there's like sort of an agreed upon origin story. It's his parents were shot and then, whatever. But other than that, there's no one canonical version of the Batman story. It is, so to me, it all feels like fan fiction, even if it's endorsed by and published by DC. It's not like fan fiction in the democratic way.
Right.
It's still fan fiction in that it's not fault. Like, it's just a, what if Batman did this? What if his story went this way? What if Batman was really old? What if Batman was gay? What if Batman did this with the Joker? Or what if he married Harley Quinn? Like, whatever. I'm making up all these things because I've never read a Batman comic. I have no idea what the fuck's happening. But
you did a month of them.
That's true. I read a couple of those. And so that frustrated me because I'm very used to novels and movies, and this is what happens in the story, and everything else is fake. And so I had a really hard time, and still have a hard time, like wrapping my head around, well, how do we decide what, like, how can you love this character when there's no canon for this character? Because there are a million versions of what's happened to this character. So that's something that I still kind of struggle with. How do you sort of view those things?
For Batman, I think it's a la carte because there are just too many cooks in the kitchen. It's up to the writer, it's up to the artist, it's also not up to them at all. It's up to the editors and whoever's in charge of DC, and then whoever owns DC, and then whoever owns them. So there are too many people to blame. I like when there's one person to blame. I think that's why I thought Terrifier was so cool.
Sure.
Because it was the writer. He's the writer, director, editor, and he does the creature design. That means I'm seeing one person's vision.
Yeah.
There's nothing I love more. It doesn't matter if it's not the best work of art I've ever seen. I like seeing realized visions.
Yeah.
And that usually comes from one source.
Totally. But when you think about, like, when you're thinking about Batman and the story of Batman.
Well, that's what I'm getting to. Because there are so many, in my mind, authentic versions of Batman. There is, I mean, we talked about Batman Year One. I think that's a pretty stunning origin story for the character. But I also love the Adam West version. I love the Christian Bale version. I'm one of the very few people in the world who genuinely loves the George Clooney version.
And, of course, the Robert Pattinson.
But also the Sean Gordon Murphy White Knight universe.
Yeah.
I take that as... But I've read Batman stories that have done nothing for me.
Yeah.
I've never really read one that I've thought was such a horrible, like, bastardization of what I consider the character that I throw the book across the room. It doesn't hit me like that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of just like, oh yeah, I know that hundreds and hundreds of people have been involved in this franchise since the 1930s. Some of them have a take that just doesn't gel with me.
Yeah.
So I just look for another comic.
Yeah.
And I'm that is way more emotionally stable than all of my other answers have been on this episode. I know I went out...
You went on a little
bit of a a
little tirade.
But I find myself much more even keeled about this one.
Yeah.
And I see, this is the thing. I feel like I keep vacillating between canon is creators and canon is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because as a creator, it's hard to sort of get away from that in this conversation. I want that maniacal dictatorial control.
Yeah,
of course I do.
Of course.
I never want anyone to fuck with the thing I'm pouring my life into.
Yeah. For reasons that benefit the corporation.
Right.
Yeah.
Or just because they want their vision on it. Fuck that. It's my vision.
Yeah. No, go away. Yeah.
Step off.
Right.
That's where I start.
Yeah. So if you're Stephen King in the Shining example, but what do you do?
I heard this.
The movie's better.
I know. Because as an audience member, I feel the canon is a relevant way. Where I want to do it a la carte.
Yeah.
And whatever I'm comfortable with, whatever I like that day. I heard this argument. I think it might have been from Jack White, but I think I've heard it echoed elsewhere. So it's sort of a larger relevant point. And it's artists arguing that once a work is released, it's really not theirs anymore anyway.
You told me that the other day. I think it was Jack White.
Yeah. And it was that, like, you have no control over how people receive your work, how they interpret it, how they react to it.
No,
you can't control if something's a hit.
Right. And the artists who then come in and tell people how to interpret their work are incredibly obnoxious, and you lose all respect for them. Because there are artists who do that, particularly like visual, like fine artists. But this is why, particularly those.
This is why we don't watch the behind the scenes stuff after House of the Dragon.
Well, no, that's not why I don't. It's because I don't want to be spoiled. But I mean, yes, because sometimes they really are trying to tell you how to interpret, and also, you're like, let me do it. Calm down.
Listen to our podcast.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's something I practice in my job all the time. I work in a museum, and I'm not telling my visitors how to interpret the thing we're looking at. I let them do it. And that's what's so special about it.
I think about this all the time because I think before anyone starts making art that is really fleshed out in a way that is talked about later, like a real work of art, before you do that, you enjoy art. And I think everyone who's ever lived has had thoughts about the art they've consumed and reflections or analysis or theories. And that is obviously a valuable skill and a passionate pursuit of mine. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But it's an entirely different muscle than creating art.
Totally.
And telling
because I can't do that. I can talk about art all day. I can't make anything.
And I feel like I can kind of, there's like a smell test thing now when I can recognize when someone thinks about art a lot, but they're in the position now where someone's giving them money to tell a story, and they're just telling their thoughts about other art.
Yes, we've talked about that before.
And it doesn't feel like an original work. Yeah. It feels like their thoughts about another work of art.
Yeah.
And there is an impulse to do that. Like, what's my thought about this or that or Batman or whatever? And then you end up telling you turn like your thoughts and theories, you give it a loose structure, and you call it its own work of art.
Right.
But it doesn't really have the same depth or punch. It doesn't have that like divine spark that whatever the original thing does.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to divorce that either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard.
Like, okay, so I think this might be a good last example to close out with.
Okay.
And this sort of complicates our other definitions and positions.
Oh, perfect. Great.
Public domain. So it's a set period of time after the original creator dies, or usually it becomes something.
Or their heirs die, or whatever it is, yeah.
Or it ends up being embroiled in copyright. For example, Winnie the Pooh. The original version, which doesn't have the red shirt yet. These things are all...
That's right, he doesn't.
It's all delayed by who added what to the mythology of Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, the mythology. Yeah.
That original version is now in the public domain. And what that means is there isn't an ongoing copyright for that original version. You don't have to pay anyone anything to use it.
Nobody owns Winnie the Pooh.
It means everyone has free reign access to that IP.
Yeah.
And that all of those interpretations and products and stories are equally valid.
Right, because you don't have to consult the A.A. Milne estate to get the rights or whatever. Like the way that technically Amazon bought the rights from the Tolkien estate to make Rings of Power.
Right.
It's not like because Tolkien is not in the public domain, but anybody can now make anything about it. That's why there are 55 versions of The Great Gatsby that you can buy at the store now, because it's now in the public domain. Yeah. Anybody can make a movie about it, anybody. And so it's all kind of has to be, it's more democratic in that way, that it's all on equal footing. But then you're running into the same problem of the copyright thing of it's no longer tied to the creator, and it's just anybody doing whatever.
You know what gives me some solace about this problem of public domain?
What?
That it only becomes a problem after the creator's dead.
That is true. They are not around to see the monstrosity.
I feel like that's an important part of this conversation.
Well, maybe we shouldn't be so mad about Rings of Power, because Jolkin, Tolkien is not with us anymore.
Sure. So is Christopher.
Right. But it's still, I mean, the man hasn't been dead that long. It feels disrespectful.
It's also, it's an interesting inevitability.
Yeah.
If everything will enter public domain, and, Disney tries to harangue the law and change it every time Mickey Mouse comes up, for example.
Yeah, because they can't lose Mickey Mouse.
And usually whenever it comes within 20 years of that happening, the law changes a bit and pushes it off.
Yeah.
But it looks like that might not happen this time.
Oh,
so in the next couple of decades, we could get, just keeping it within the bounds of this conversation, not just Mickey, but Batman
Yeah.
could begin to enter the public domain.
Interesting.
And all of those details and
the phone company would no longer own Batman.
But like, if we're talking about, does it only pertain to the original creator? Well, eventually the original creator dies. And the people might still be interested in the idea and the story. Then it becomes an issue of copyright, because if the thing is that successful, it's going to be owned and sold by someone. But then eventually it enters the public domain. Yeah. So I feel like the way I outline these definitions,
it's just the natural progression.
Is sort of that's just the progression of time. Canon begins as creators. It then goes to copyright. And then once it hits public domain, it's irrelevant.
Free for all. Interesting. I think it's kind of fun.
I really wish I'd done that on purpose.
You did do that. You just have to go with it. Pretend it was meant to be all along.
Would I rather be maniacally over-prepared or smart in the moment? So yeah, let's wrap up with these two questions.
Okay.
Just to sort of lock it down. Which definition do you most subscribe to of those three?
I think still the creator, but not a hard and fast rule because of reasons.
And if the creator's dead, it's a la carte.
No. I still don't agree with that.
Oh, so you go copyright?
Yeah.
Oh, you're a corporate shill.
I mean, no. I mean, like, for example, like Jane Austen, right? Like the new Persuasion movie is a great movie, and I love it. But that's not the canon of Persuasion. That's not the Persuasion story.
Yeah, so that's canon is irrelevant.
Well, no, it's because it's not Jane Austen, because she's dead.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Like I'm
but
tying
it's also
it back.
public domain, I guess.
Yes.
They didn't have to pay the Austen estate.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like it's not irrelevant because it's not tied to the creator.
In the life cycle of an IP, since it is public domain, it is now canon is irrelevant anyway.
I suppose.
And you just get to have an opinion on it.
And I mean, it's really hard for me to not think of the 2005 Pride and Prejudice as canon. I know it's drastically different from the book.
Yeah.
And I adore the book. It is my favorite book. But it is my favorite book in part because that is my favorite movie.
I feel like I was sort of prepped for this conversation coming from like a Shakespeare background.
Yeah.
Because race and gender swaps started there. That's what's been happening for hundreds of years. And
it's still happening in Shakespeare adaptations, and it's always fascinating.
Yes, it's always interesting. Even a perfectly down the middle kind of toga-y stage production, I'll always be interested in a Shakespeare thing.
Yeah.
But that version of Twelfth Night, where they swap the main character's name, I'm forgetting in the moment, so Viola? I sound stupid. No, it was like the steward kind of guy who they turned into a woman.
Steward? Sebastian?
The uptight guy. No, in the house. What are you talking about?
I don't know.
The guy in the house who's like the butler.
Oh.
You know?
Shit.
Yeah, so they made that role a woman.
Okay.
That's my favorite version of Twelfth Night I've ever seen.
Yes.
But I also don't have to show my papers to prove that I'm okay with adaptation.
Yeah.
I just think stage productions in Shakespeare showed me how wonderful this world can be.
Yeah.
And going into that, being born in the 1990s, that's 400 years after the guy's dead anyway.
Yeah.
So, like, of course it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay the Shakespeare estate to make your movie.
Yeah.
It's
hard to know to even conceive of a canon for Shakespeare because everything's an adaptation. But any version of it, unless you're reading the text, is an adaptation.
But it was genuinely, just to sort of wrap up that thought from earlier.
Yeah.
It is strange to go from that perspective of, oh, cool, they're doing something funky with Macbeth and playing it totally different. Yeah. Or they're casting in a totally different way. I wonder what that looks like. To then see the like suspicion online of like, oh, well, it means that you hate these people if you're saying I mean, we talked about this in the episode we did on Rings of Power.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, they're casting different people, whatever.
Okay.
I hope they cast the best person for the role.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about the people they found.
Right. Yeah.
It's just so not the point.
I know. I saw a Richard III with a woman as Richard III.
Awesome. Yeah.
It was really interesting. I don't think it was my favorite Richard III I've seen. And that's not because I'm a missionist. My God. But it was still really cool. Right. Yeah.
It's just a different media literacy is at an all-time low.
Oh, so you hate women.
Exactly.
You, a woman, hate women. Oh, yeah.
So what definition you're still with creators?
Yeah. What about you?
I
I think you're at a la carte with a
bias to
with
creators.
A bias to creators because you yourself are a creator.
Yeah, but as long as they're dead, I think it becomes irrelevant.
Even with Tolkien, because he's dead.
Yes.
Oh,
I think
that was not what your little tirade.
Yes, it was. I was fighting for my right to be a la carte and take it as fully optional.
Oh, okay, fine.
I was not. I was passionately disrespecting the canon as copyright opinion.
Yeah, no, and I agreed with you. I'm just making fun of you because it's fun, but I totally agree with you.
I think I'm team canon is irrelevant with a bias to creators as long as they're alive, and especially like George R. R. Martin, as long as they're actively involved and still kicking and controlling the thing.
What if the creator's like a huge asshole?
Like. Okay, so here, let me tell a dumb story about myself that kind of, I think, wraps this up.
Oh, okay, great.
When I was in college, I hunted down and found an old cassette recording of Douglas Adams reading the first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book. Cool. That's the author.
Yeah.
And he obviously wrote the books. He also wrote the radio drama. He wrote the first script for the movie. Fingerprints are all over the thing. All of them are arguably canon with his involvement.
Yes, even though they're different adaptations of themselves.
But as a guy who grew up with audiobooks, as a guy who does audiobooks and thinks they are sort of the most intimate form of storytelling possible, and the reason I think that is because they have the most authorial control and intent behind them. When I found out that he had done this reading of his book, I was elated.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if there was a wax cylinder of Shakespeare doing some line readings of Hamlet.
Oh my
so you
God.
could hear how to be or not to be is supposed to be
how it's supposed
spoken.
to be. What's the canon?
And that's
right.
not saying that you can't speak it different ways. But I want to know what he was thinking when he wrote that.
Yeah.
I can totally disregard that in my own stage version. But I'm also curious to see how he spoke that speech.
Right.
And when I hunted down that Douglas Adams thing, it was like I was getting the keys to the kingdom.
Sure.
Like this mythical thing was real. This utter authority.
Right.
For a version of a story I already loved.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the bias to the creator is pretty inescapable in me.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. See, now I'm thinking about, so I think I mentioned this before because I did this like during peak COVID, which is when we started this show. The Lemony Snicket series of Unfortunate Events. Tim Curry reads those audiobooks, but Lemony Snicket also reads some of them. And I was doing the audiobooks, trying not to go insane when we were in lockdown. And I didn't like the Lemony Snicket versions. I hated it.
That's the problem.
And he's the author, so you think that's the purest form.
Right.
This is how these lines are supposed to sound. And I absolutely hated it because it was not, when I first read those books when I was a kid, I just read them. I didn't do audiobooks. And then I heard the Tim Curry ones and I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I envisioned. He's reading these lines. Like, it's the exact amount of gravitas and drama and theatricality and gothicness, and then Lemony Snicket's doing it, and I'm like, this is not what it's supposed to be, even though he should, in theory, have that perfect, like, authoritative voice.
But that's the problem. Like, and that's why I think I'm calling it a bias that I have towards canon as creators.
Yeah.
Because I'm romanticizing whatever the creator touches.
Yes.
And whoever wrote Rocky Horror is not going to do Frankenfurter as well as Tim Curry did.
Well, that's the other thing.
Not every writer is
a good performer.
The best person possible for the role.
Yeah.
Of all of the other parts that it takes to get something made.
Not everything can be Fleabag.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
it is simpler when it's one artistic vision.
It is. And Fleabag's another fun one because you have the play that she wrote and starred in, and then you have the show which she wrote and starred in. And both are different and both are fantastic.
And honestly, as much as I have qualms about Amazon, Fleabag is an Amazon production.
I do remember that.
And Fleabag's incredible.
Fleabag is so good, y'all.
The argument I made about Amazon, by the way, you could make about every single company in America.
Well, exactly, because it's like the bad company is making the thing, but there are good creators working on that production. Like, that's not to say that every person working on Rings of Power is a capitalist pig.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
No.
And I with absolute certainty, I know there are people who adore Tolkien and want to make the best thing possible.
Totally.
Even besides Tolkien. I know they want to make the best thing they can possibly make.
Absolutely.
I know there are hundreds of artists involved with that show who are working passionately for that thing to be great. And I know that you could find skeletons in the closet of any studio. I'm not singling out Amazon above and beyond all others.
Yeah, like as if there aren't other corporations.
There are problems with a billion companies. There are scandals and bad histories and bad headlines for every network and studio and company. And there are good people working at all of those places.
Exactly. For every Waystar Royco, there is a cousin Greg.
Exactly. And like the fact that we've gone through pretty much every major franchise in the American consciousness.
Yes.
It's not about any one of those things. It's not about any one studio or creator or actor or adaptation. I think the idea of canon is something, even if it's not intentional, it's something we engage with pretty much every day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I'm glad we ended up talking about it. I think we kind of got something out of it. But
yeah, no, this was fun.
It also feels like something we've flirted with for 2 years.
It's been something that's like, it's always on our minds, and it just hasn't ever been able to have its full moment in the socialist sun. So I'm glad we got to do it.
I guess the final question is, does canon matter?
Yes and no.
And so we end where we begin.
Full circle.
If you enjoy this little discussion episode, go support the show on Substack.
Yeah.
That is, we're Second Breakfast Pod everywhere. We have a booming YouTube and TikTok presence. We are on Gmail. You can just email us there. We're also
comment on the Substack post
on Instagram all the time.
Yeah.
And if you are following along with House of the Dragon, we do our episodes every Tuesday.
Yep.
But the cool thing is we have incorporated listener feedback and polls into those discussions. And those polls run on Instagram. I do them on Monday because we record Monday night. So if you want to be a part of that,
comes out Sunday night. So
yeah, if you want to be a part of that, that'll be over on Instagram. But those that were Second Breakfast Pod everywhere. I'm really working on the internet presence for the show and all the YouTube.
Still no Twitter though, but I want to leave it at
Twitter
that.
Sucks.
But Cam's got a Twitter, so just find him there.
But Substack's the one that counts. That's the one where you get a direct line to us, you get exclusive discussion and coverage of art. You
can see each other's comments and
you get
interact.
And we have very thoughtful listeners. We
do.
There are carefully curated memes for each House of the Dragon episode.
There are, but that's for our paid subscribers. You guys are special.
This is episode 195.
This is of our show?
Right now that we're doing.
Yeah, wow.
So you've gotten 194 and 3/4 episodes for free. So if you'd like to support the show,
$5 a month.
$5 a month or $50 a year.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
And that's for all that bonus stuff and just to be a good guy.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll be back on Tuesday with the episode 8 of House of the Dragon we'll be discussing, and hopefully we'll have Tristan back with us. And then we'll be back next Friday with the first chapter of the next Witcher book, which is called Baptism of Fire.
I'm so excited. I haven't read it yet.
Awesome. So, let us know what you thought of this little comeback for discussion episodes. Technically, we've done one of these before. We talked about growing up with Harry Potter, I think, last year.
Yeah, I think it was last spring. So not that, but yeah. And let us know what you think about canon. Like what are your responses to any of this?
Please
I'd love to know.
Yeah, and it's a discussion. So if we get a bunch of responses, we can just keep talking about it.
Do a follow-up, yeah.
Also, another little Substack bonus is if we have one of these ideas really nailed down ahead of time, we'll post out a little Substack update and get your thoughts beforehand.
Yeah.
And we'll just roll those into the conversation.
Exactly.
So, wonderful. Thank you for your time, Maggie and audience. I think this was fun.
Thank you, my special friend.
I always feel bad. I mean, we've gone an hour and 12 minutes. I feel the need to apologize to everyone involved.
You don't have to apologize. Anybody who wanted to stop listening would have already done it. So true. Anybody who wanted to stick around is sticking around.
They've decided our podcast canon is irrelevant.
That's exactly right.
All right.
All right.
Well, we did the plugs.
See you soon. Have a good weekend. See you on Tuesday.
Bye.